The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
One of the most difficult things about this work, and even about understanding or analyzing what's going on around us in the world politically, is having an effective lens, a framework that we can categorize and structure our minds to be able to understand. And maybe understanding is a little bit ambitious because it's hard to understand why our world is as mad as it is, as absurd as it is. But it helps to have a framework. And I want to give you the framework that I have kind of intuitively been using after I learned it myself in my academic studies. It's best represented by the work of Kenneth Waltz. And anyone who's studied political science or international relations, you should recognize that name. His seminal work, Man, the State, and War, gives us three levels of analysis: the individual, the nation, and the international community. That was a basic framework. Of course, there's so much more to his work, but that's the simplest way to summarize. As we look at the stories, as we look at the politics, as we look at the conflict, particularly as we look at the propaganda, we have to be able to categorize which level of analysis does this fall under. We need to be able to understand what it is that we're dealing with. Are we dealing with the individual? Are we dealing with the nation or the state? When he says the state, he's referring to nation states. Are we dealing with the international community, which, according to the realist paradigm, that's the neo-realist paradigm of Kenneth Waltz, the state, the international community is one of war and conflict, and we see that bearing out in Ukraine with the invasion from Vladimir Putin. Here's why it's so important to have that framework, because generally speaking, I've found since I learned that many, many years ago, I'm not going to give you my age. Once I learned that, I started noticing that, trichotomy, I'm just going to throw that out there, that breakdown, that three-tiered level analysis in everything. The only thing that I might add to it would be universal, right? You have the individual, what's going on with the individual person, you, and even more specifically, what's going on locally. You have to be able to dive into what's happening in your immediate area. And we can't neglect that, because that's what impacts you. What is happening in your local politics, what's happening in your neighborhood, and what's happening in your micro economy, in your household. Those things are so important that if your individual life is not taken care of, at least to a subsistence level, then you simply cannot participate or even have time to be concerned about what's going on the national level or what's going on the international level. That said, it is extremely difficult to be able to take the fire hydrant of news and propaganda, quite honestly, issues, controversies, not scandals so much, even though scandals have become a really good way of muddying the water so that you don't really see what's going on. Our politicians, our political leaders have learned the art of red herrings. They've learned the art of confusion and how to stir the pot. And we've talked about that before, particularly with Ron DeSantis out of the state of Florida. He is particularly adept at doing this, where he would muddy the waters with some cultural issue. Meanwhile, what he's actually doing in the background is giving $1 billion of taxpayer money to corporations in the state of Florida, that type of thing. It's difficult to just navigate the complicated nature of our reality as it is, let alone having to deal with the propaganda and all the obfuscation that comes with these politicians. Here's why I'm saying this. We have to be able to go from the international level of analysis, because what's happening right now on the international stage, it's an inflection point in history. What we're going through on the international stage with Russia, Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, OPEC now aligning with Russia and cutting production of oil, which is going to be extremely damaging to the United States, the entire global economy, obviously, but particularly it's a method of interfering with our elections. And it is a method of penalizing and punishing those that are opposing Vladimir Putin. And all of those things are complicated on the international level, but you have to be able to grasp it, but then also see how what's happening on the local, on the state level. And when I say state, I mean the national, domestic level, what's happening in our national politics. January 6th, we have an ongoing coup in the United States of America. This is not hyperbole. A couple of years ago, I started yelling this at the top of my lungs because it hit me at the beginning of the pandemic. Before even the election, the 2020 election, it really hit me that we were on a path towards some type of radical change. And every revolution is not a good revolution. And what we've seen on the domestic level, we've seen the concerted effort and it's not even effort, they are succeeding. The conservative movement in this country, they are absolutely succeeding at tearing down this democracy to install a theocratic fascist state. And so we have to see how that is bearing out on the domestic level, but how does that interplay with the international level? And to be quite honest, despite all of those things being milestones, I mean, these are world-changing events that are happening. If you as an individual don't have your life taken care of, if the community that you live in is being ravaged by whatever the case may be, if you consider the Black community, not only do we have to be concerned about what's happening across this nation, because clearly, as the Republicans and the conservatives overthrow democracy and install a dictatorship, a theocratic, I just want to state that as a matter of fact at this point. I don't want to have to say it with any bombosity. I hope that you've been paying attention enough to realize they are really making a play to overthrow this country. And that's absolutely going to be detrimental to us as individuals. But it's hard to focus on that when Black people are still getting killed by police, and when it hits your neighborhood, when it hits your community, when it hits your family. It's hard to deal with when your neighborhood was targeted for gentrification and your houses were sold right underneath you, the houses that you were renting, right? It's hard when your family homes were targeted by people who want to purchase Momo's house. And they want to get it they don't even want to buy it. They want to, you can't even afford to pay taxes, and now you lose the house. Like, these are real issues that happen to us on an individual level. And if your individual life is not at a minimal, at something where you can have a moment to pause and reflect and have a moment of peace to actually consider free time, more specifically, to actually consider what is going on, then there's no way you can turn your attention from your individual situation to what's happening on the national, on the domestic level. And if you can't even focus what's happening on the national level, it's very difficult to then extrapolate and go higher to what's happening on the international level. But my friends, we all are going to have to be scholars. And I don't mean that from a, erudite kind of navel-gazing, academia sense. No, I think every single one of us has to be able to actively compartmentalize and to break down what's going on in your life, in your community, in your country, and on the international level with every single story that comes across our desk. And I guess that's my job. That's why you're listening to me. So you don't necessarily have that time. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to intentionally structure the podcast to address those three levels of analysis going forward. In every episode, we're going to address something that happens on the international level, and we're going to make sure that we tie it to what's happening on the national level. And then in every episode, I want to talk about something that's happening on the local level. And in the sense of the local level, I'm obviously going to be skipping around the country because it's not just about what's happening to me as an individual. Even though that's your vantage point from your seat, you have every right to be preeminently concerned with what's happening in your individual community and your life. But as for me and my job, I'm going to take you from Ukraine to January 6th to a police shooting that just happened in Gulfport, Mississippi. 15-year-old boy shot in the head by police, died. The police claimed that he was wielding a weapon. Witnesses say he had his hands up. The body cam footage has not been released, and I am planning to head over to Mississippi because Gulfport, Mississippi is, in fact, where I actually studied on the doctoral level. I didn't finish it, ran out of money, student loan money. So, Joe Biden, when are you going to cancel all the debt? I'd like to go back and finish. But Gulfport, Mississippi is my stomping ground, so I'm going to head over there, and I'm going to talk with the family and try to do my part. But we have to be flexible enough to be able to go from Duval to Senegal, from the north side to Palestine. Let's begin in Ukraine. In retaliation for Ukraine's attack against the key strategic bridge that connected Russia to Crimea, Russian forces began striking the city center of Kiev. Universities were struck, apartments were struck, playgrounds were struck. The strikes, according to the New York Times, killed at least 14 people and disrupted electricity in some regions. Russia said that it was a retaliation for a blast on a key bridge to Crimea, and the United Nations General Assembly convened for an emergency session. Again, I want to emphasize that city centers were the targets. Some 11 different city centers were targeted. The missiles that Russia sent into Ukraine, into these cities, did not strike any military sites. It did not strike any of their military capacity. It was, in fact, a temper tantrum by Vladimir Putin, who was severely embarrassed because the bridge that he just dedicated 4 years ago, celebrating his ability to annex Crimea and to connect it to Russia, was destroyed. Not the entire bridge, but a significant section of it. And it was an embarrassing blow to his ego. And in response, he just shot missiles at city centers. Not at their air bases, not at their defenses, not at any of their military bases, which would be expected. In war, you expect retaliation, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But Vladimir Putin took it upon himself to strike so haphazardly that people who were on their way to get coffee lost their lives. Playgrounds were devastated. Apartment buildings, people died in their homes. But he did not strike at their forces. It's because they really haven't shown the capacity to be able to stop Ukraine's forces. And so he attacked children, mothers, fathers, grandparents. This was cast as an appropriate retaliation for the 3 lives that were lost at 6 a.m. in the morning, local time, when some Ukrainian force, we don't know exactly what the methodology was, but we did see the explosion, and it was a spectacular explosion, and I don't mean that in a flattering sense. I mean, it was huge. It was enough to take out a bridge that people thought could not be taken out. They struck in the early morning hours, and they lost 3 Russians. We don't know if those Russians were civilians, but what we are hearing is the propaganda. The propaganda first came out and said that they were civilians. Then the next thing they said, it came out and said, well, they were medics. And then finally, when that didn't fly, the propagandists, the pro-Putin propagandists that are everywhere, said it didn't matter whether they were civilians who were struck or not, that Vladimir Putin had the right to retaliate in the fashion that he did, striking playgrounds, coffee shops, apartments, while people were going and getting ready for work. I want to put this caveat here. The most absurd and the saddest and the sickest thing about this is the war itself. The fact that we are engaged in a war that could certainly not only destabilize the region, but obviously take us to the brink of a nuclear disaster, is itself the absurdity. Second to that is the absurdity of the propagandists who have no shame whatsoever drawing a false equivalence between a strategic strike that targeted a bridge that was used to resupply their military forces, a standard target in wartime. We are now inundated with the likes of Glenn Greenwald, Michael Tracy, and all of the Republican Party, all of the sycophants who are doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin, drawing a false equivalence and expecting us to sit back and accept that the proper level of retaliation for a strategic strike against a military target are playgrounds, coffee shops, people going to work, children, grandmothers, parents. It is the propaganda that is most disgusting to me because there's nothing I can do about the actual war that's going on. In that way, I feel helpless because there's nothing that we as individuals, keep in mind that framework, the Kenneth Waltz framework, the individual, the man, the state, war. There's very little that we can do as individuals who do not wield nation level political power. There's very little that we can do to have any effect whatsoever except for scream from the pews, scream from the balcony seats, scream from the peanut gallery for no more war. Like, that's all we can do. And in the midst of us yelling at the top of our lungs that the best way for this war to end is for the person who started it to leave, right? The person who is creating the offense to stand down, for the abuser to stop the abuse. But we are inundated with a commentariat of paid Putin propagandists and those who are just willingly doing it for free, trying to convince us that Vladimir Putin is waging a just war, when we see over the weekend his methodology is not to strike military bases, not to weaken Ukraine's military forces, but like a man-child with a gun, he goes on a shooting spree, a spoiled, petulant mass shooter, except he has missiles. And because he cannot do anything on the battlefield except for his troops retreating as cowards because Ukraine is standing so strong, instead of handling this on the battlefield, maybe with a strategic strike of his own against some military forces, no, we are being told by the likes of people who I shared at one time a common thread. At one time, I would call them colleagues in the commentariat. They're now telling us that this is proper, that the proper response to losing a military bridge is to target playgrounds, universities, and coffee shops. This is the level of sadism, of sickness, of downright propaganda, where they're telling us that the sky is green and the grass is blue. They're telling us that the just thing is for Vladimir Putin to continue the war. They're telling us that the way to peace, these twisted individuals are telling us that the way to peace is for the person that is being assaulted to surrender to that assault so it could get done, that it'll be over with. It'll be done. And they're even trying to tell us that if Vladimir Putin pulls the trigger on a nuclear weapon, that it's really the fault of Ukraine. And it's really the fault of the United States of America. If that is the type of propaganda that you are hearing, then forgive the religious jargon, but you need to rebuke that. In Jesus' name.
So when you see Putin and a very interesting speech that was just given, I think, literally in the last couple of days by Medvedev. Okay, the former. So Medvedev is another guy in the hierarchy. He was the president of Russia for a short period of time. Medvedev's speech was very stern, and so we have got to pay attention because these are not shy leaders. These are bold leaders who have everything at stake in terms of protecting their country.
Let's move our level of analysis from international to the domestic level. That was the voice of former National Security Advisor who required a pardon from Donald Trump, Michael Flynn. They're advocating on behalf of Medvedev and Vladimir Putin as strong leaders who we should look at and we should model ourselves after. He goes on to call our leadership here in the United States fools, and as well as Zelensky is a fool. Michael Flynn is the best way to understand the connection between the international level and the domestic problem that we're having, the inflection point on the international level where this global pan-reactionary movement, these people who have rejected modernity, Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, they have teamed up with the Christian nationalists here in the United States. There is an alliance between the Republican conservatives here in America who are doing everything they can to roll back the progress of the 20th century, roll back a woman's right to choose, roll back any rights for the LGBTQIA community. And they have now even taken a full frontal assault on the black church. We'll talk about that probably in another episode. But these people have united, and Michael Flynn gives us the best way of understanding the connection because he is an international player. He is a person who had political power directly through the United States of America as a former general, as a retired general, as a former national security advisor. He had an enormous amount of power and ability to impact global politics. And he has leveraged those relationships with actors like Vladimir Putin and connected it directly to the Christian nationalist movement here in the United States of America. That's the bridge. And it's not because they all so fervently believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. No, it's because they agree that the type of world that they want is one where a nation is free to do anything it wants to do internally to its people, to their indigenous populations, to their ethnic minorities. So long as they are free to do whatever they want internally, they can agree to work together globally. Now, this is a unique change in terms of a global paradigm, right? Right now, we have cooperation through, and I'm gonna tread lightly here because it's not actually in reality. It's not a true cooperation based on human rights and progress, because we see the global South being regularly excluded from this progress, and we see the rights of the human rights of the global South being violated every single minute of every single day, right? But in terms of why we were able to have a period of peace after the Second World War up until now, and again, I'm using these words very loosely because we have seen periods of war, but we have not seen global war. And I'm speaking specifically in the language of international relations, because of course there have been proxy wars. Of course, there was the invasion of Iraq, which we oppose vehemently, right? But in terms of global, world-changing wars, there was a period of quote unquote peace, and it was best explained by cooperation through economics and cooperation on human rights and cooperation and an agreement on democracy. Those two of those three paradigms has been completely rejected by this new regime that is vying for power on the global stage. They're going to keep the economics because they all love, everybody loves, whether it's the fascist or the liberal, whether it is the whoever is in charge on the international stage, they absolutely love the obscene amount of wealth that can be gathered through capitalism. So they're not going to overthrow capitalism. And this is an important point for all of my former colleagues and comrades who believe that Russia represents the socialist vanguard. They do not. They are not. They are rabid oligarchical capitalists who are looking to drain the life force out of workers globally because they are more than happy with the wealth. They disagree on human rights, particularly the rights of the ethnic minorities in their nations. And they certainly disagree on democracy because none of them want to give up power, just like Donald Trump didn't want to give up power. And so there is now vying for power on the international stage, and Michael Flynn is still the best representative of how this connects the United States to the United States. On the international stage, they're vying for the ability to do whatever they want to domestically, so long as you don't intervene. A non-interventionist kind of policy that rejects democracy, that rejects modernity, that rejects women's rights, that rejects the rights of minorities, and all out rejects democracy in favor of protecting the ruling elite in that particular nation. And this is how you can have Republicans here in the United States who were foaming at the mouth level McCarthyists, Red Scare, anti-Russia, now turn on a dime because they realize for them to be able to overthrow American democracy, which without question that is what they're doing, they are going to need a global alliance that they can rely on to help them on the global stage. And they cannot get that through anything in the West. The Republican Party knows that, and they have rejected it. They have completely rejected democracy in exchange for a dictatorial regime here domestically that will align internationally with people who won't say a word about it. People who also not only will not say a word about it, but they are going to carry on the same type of policies in their respective nations. And Michael Flynn is all about that. Michael Flynn is all about that because he absolutely believes in his heart that this world should be dominated by the likes of himself. Obviously, he believes that he is a top tier thinker. He believes he is a top tier human being and that this world should be run by people like Vladimir Putin and Medvedev, Viktor Orban, and the rest of the pan-reactionary cabal. We have in the United States of America a coup that is backed on the international stage. They have global alliances. They have nations who have military might, the ability to wage war, who are going to align with them and to agree that the best thing for America is for democracy to dissolve so that someone like Donald Trump can remain in power. And if Donald Trump doesn't get it, then Ron DeSantis. This is what's happening. And they have this type of messaging being parroted by the likes of Tulsi Gabbard, who, if you've been listening to my show any amount of time, you know I have been calling Tulsi Gabbard out for the fraud that she has always been. Today, she made it official and said that she's no longer going to be a part of the Democratic Party. And here's why.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war.
She did this as a promotion for her new show that's coming out, her podcast. I mean, people sell their souls for a lot less, so I guess a podcast deal is worth it, huh, Tulsi? And I have to give her, she has a measure of talent because it takes a lot of talent to be able to shove into a brief 30-second spot the exact talking points that would satisfy not only Nazis, white supremacists, Christian nationalists, as well as Vladimir Putin. I mean, that takes a lot of talent. Kudos, Tulsi. But these are the people who have been infiltrating our ranks. Tulsi ran as a Democrat, and when she ran, I knew she was there merely to sandbag Bernie Sanders. And when she lost in the primaries, she didn't endorse the progressive, she endorsed Joe Biden. And now she's claiming that Joe Biden's the worst president ever. Well, tell us something, Tulsi. You endorsed him. So what does that say about you? And what does it say about you that you are now turning coat? Well, it says what we've been saying all along. That there is a flank in the United States of America that is 100% committed their lives, their reputations, their freedom, and their money. They've bet it all on destroying democracy so that they don't have to deal with anybody that's woke. Define woke without just simply admitting that you're a racist. Define global elitist without just revealing that you're an anti-Semite. All right, let's have this patron party.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
Here we go. Very special welcome to all of our newest patrons, without whom this show is simply not possible. Shout out to Jason Hudson. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. Ruby Kenway, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Crazy Peaceful, thank you so much for your very considerate patronage. We appreciate you. And Tira, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Whoa. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get access to all of our patron parties, access to exclusive content, be the first to know where I am and what I'm doing and who I'm doing it to. Patreon.com/The BPD Show. We'll be back. But you got to bop your head first. DC, baby. Oh, and ad-free content, because here's an ad for the rest of you.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yeah. Welcome back. Listen, I'm already over time, and I honestly need to get out of here. I got to pack and hit the road first thing tomorrow. I'm headed out to do a couple of stories. I mentioned earlier at the top of the show the shooting of the 15-year-old Jaheim McMillan in Gulfport, Mississippi. We are trying to get the body cam and the dash cam footage released from the police there locally, but they have also turned this over to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations. According to the police report, the 15-year-old was in a group of young men, young boys, who, according to the police report, and this is critical, the original report said that they were running into a Family Dollar to evade police officers when gunfire was exchanged, and the 15-year-old Jaheim McMillan was shot and laid there in front of the Family Dollar store, bleeding out. They handcuffed him, but provided him no assistance. We have eyewitness testimony that said that he not only was not armed, but that he had his hands up. Now, I want to start here by saying we must, if I'm going to be a person of good faith, I have to allow for the possibility that it went down exactly like the police officers said. However, I've been doing this long enough to let you know I can read between the lines of a press release that has been released from a police union-styled writer. And I also have been doing this long enough to know that if that body cam footage corroborated what the police officer said, they would have released it instantly. I mean, within 24 hours. So something is afoot, and because I know that area so well, and because I am continuing my efforts organizing pastors and churches across the South, that's what I'm doing during the day. Instead of doing the show on a regular basis, the morning show every day like I was, I'm actively trying to encourage pastors and congregations to get into this fight. And I had not had a chance to hit the state of Mississippi yet. So I'm headed over to Mississippi, and I will be traveling quite a few hours up and down the state, talking with various congregations, as well as organizing with the people of Gulfport, Mississippi, to get one thing. The immediate thing that we're asking is for the body cam footage to be released so that we can see for ourselves, and the family, most importantly, can see for themselves what actually happened. And if it aligns with the police report, then it is a tragedy. But witnesses say otherwise. And so we're going to do our best to go over there. I have to get out of here, and I'm going to give you more information on that for the patrons. I need your support. Everything that we do on our own dime. And by our own dime, I mean through the help of our patrons. So go to patreon.com/The BPD Show and support us. And if you would like to support us some other way, maybe you want to send us a Cash App or you want to send a PayPal, you can do that. I'll leave the links to that in the description for today. But most certainly, we need your help to get this work done. It's a labor of love. I don't, honestly, if I could just be transparent with you for a second, my individual, my personal life is committed to this work. And whether you're seeing me every single day on the screen, it's actually more beneficial for you not to be honest with you, because it has freed me up to get my hands dirty, to touch grass, and most importantly, to connect with the people. I have developed so many wonderful relationships, partnerships, and just collaborations with brilliant people across the South. And I'm excited about doing it in the South, too, because that's really where I'm from. I'm sure you could tell by my vernacular and my accent. But I'm excited to do that because there is so much organizing power here in the South. And I want to add to it. So go to patreon.com/The BPD Show. We need your support. Love you, mean it, and I'll see you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.